is here from San Francisco. Chandni is the Global Citizen Fellow, an outreach officer for the U.S. Fund for UNICEF, and has been doing that job for the last year and a half. And as such, does many presentations like this for similar activities on UNICEF's behalf. UNICEF is the world's largest humanitarian organization for children. And for many of us slightly older folk, connecting pennies for UNICEF while trick-or-treating at Halloween was our first realization that there were other kids around the world that were suffering and that there was a way we could help. So that program that was started by a couple in 1959 went on to raise over $175 million, and it's still going on today. So that's pretty amazing. So at this time, I'd like to introduce and welcome Ms. Chandni Jain.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It is quite amazing that many of you probably have memories of trick-or-treating for UNICEF, and that is still going very strong today. While the projector gets started, I'm just going to give a little bit more background about the work that we do here in the United States as UNICEF USA, or the US Fund for UNICEF. I am the San Francisco, it says Community Engagement Fellow, that's just a subtitle. I'm a Global Citizenship Fellow, and a lot of that work is inspiring philanthropy and the thought of being a global citizen in children, in communities, in adults across the Bay Area. And there are 12 other fellows like me across the United States, sort of doing the grassroots community organizing work for UNICEF. And that support that we get, that we're able to get for UNICEF here in the United States is what really drives the ability of UNICEF to have programs all over the world. We're able to support UNICEF USA's fundraising efforts, education, advocacy, which is increasingly becoming a really strong branch of the US Fund for UNICEF. And we are really excited to continue meeting with representatives to talk about things like funding for UNICEF, and fellows like myself are really excited to play a really big hand in gathering volunteers to support that effort. It is working. Thank you very much. So many of you know who UNICEF is, but I wanted to give a little more context. Sorry, what's going on? Okay. More about UNICEF. I don't know why it keeps changing multiple slides. I'm sorry. UNICEF's mission is to advocate for the protection of children's rights. According to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, there are some 57 outlined rights for children all over the world, including things like the right to play, the right to an education, things that we recognize as a world, that children have different rights from adults. They have different needs that adults do. And so UNICEF helps protect those rights. Fun fact, the United States is the only nation in the world that has not signed the Convention on the Rights for the Child. So that's one of our biggest advocacy points. We like to make sure that children are able to help meet their basic needs. And we want to make sure to expand their opportunities so that they can reach their full potential. And so the way UNICEF does that is assisting them right from the start when they arrive in this world, and to help them thrive into adulthood. And the way we do that is across 7 core program areas: health, HIV/AIDS, water, sanitation, and hygiene, or WASH, nutrition, education, child protection, and the more upstream work and collaborating with the government called social inclusion. And our cross-cutting areas is humanitarian action, or work during emergencies, and gender. Gender is one of those things that we try to make sure that every single program, every single intervention that UNICEF has, we're focusing on gender equity so that our girls don't get left behind. And as I mentioned, here in the United States, we educate, advocate, and fundraise through various campaigns and programs that we have here. And so why do girls' rights really matter? The world has not yet seen what it could look like if every woman and every girl was empowered and had and all of their rights were being fulfilled. And I'm really excited to see what that world might look like one day. Evidence shows that women are, lacking in several fields, that women leaders are a minority, that women earn less than men, that for every 115 boys in school around the world, there are only 100 girls. But our world might look much different if we were able to close those gender gaps. We might be able to close the joblessness gap between men and women. Women might be able to contribute a lot more to the gross domestic product of any country and any society. We are expecting to see a lot more gender equity in future years to come around the world, and a lot of growth because of it. And we recognize that because gender is a social construct, it's not like sex, which is something that we're born with, but it is a social construct. Roles are determined based on gender. Therefore, inequities based on gender are unnatural. They're not something that we should be having in society. They're not a natural result of biological differences, and instead, they're determined by systems and cultures that we live in. And it's therefore one of the most fundamental inequalities that exist all over the world, and something that UNICEF prioritizes in addressing. And so we're curious about what are some of the reasons that, again, I don't know why it's skipping multiple slides. I'm just gonna go back here. So we really want to examine why this global picture of gender inequality is occurring before we go ahead and start to address the core causes. And I wonder if some of you might are interested in participating. A quick true and false. Raise your hand, or just shout out if you think it's true or false. 70% of the global population living in extreme poverty is female.
True.
That is true. 70% is female. Young women around the world face challenges when they're giving birth due to inadequate care, health services, medicine, and clean water.
True.
Yeah, that one's pretty easy. A recent UNESCO report finds that nearly 59 million primary school-age children are not in school, and over 53% are girls.
True.
Yeah, those are all true and very heartbreaking statistics. And so, let's talk about why that's happening. Obviously, a big factor is poverty. Families that are living in poverty preferentially send their boys to school when they don't have the ability to pay all children's school fees. Even things like preferentially providing their male children with nutritious food in the morning, nutritious lunch in the afternoon, and nutritious dinner when access to food is limited. That is something that also keeps girls from really flourishing and from developing to their full potential. And so things like not having access to their basic needs fulfilled, as simple as food and clean water, that is something that keeps female children from going to school, from really flourishing. This picture shows a school in South Sudan that UNICEF helped build, and it may seem crowded. These girls are sharing their chairs. There's no real desks or tables for them to write on. But before this school was built in this community, girls really didn't have access to education. Less than 1% of girls in South Sudan have even completed primary school education, which is a really terribly sad fact. Social stigma and cultural practices. This is something that UNICEF works really hard at the community level to address. This little girl is a child bride. She was married at the age of 10, and she is therefore confined to the practice of doing household chores, being abused by her husband, which happens a lot. Child marriage is actually commonly practiced in countries like Niger, which has the highest rates in the world, India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and many other societies. And about 700 million women that are alive today were married as children, and a third of them even were married before the age of 15, as little as 8 years old. And this is correlated with increased domestic violence, sexual violence, and of course, dropping out of education early. And so this is a practice that UNICEF tries to work with community leaders, heads of households, religious leaders in a village to help them understand why this is such a harmful practice, why girls need to be going to school but need to be getting married later, the health consequences even of getting married at such a young age. For adolescent girls, actually, this early and frequent childbirth and complications due to pregnancies and childbirth is the leading cause of death of adolescent girls around the world, and is obviously correlated with getting married at such a young age. And child marriage is sometimes also linked with child trafficking because of the sexual violence and all of the household work and things that have to do with it. Sometimes parents unknowingly or knowingly sell their daughters to men 3 or 4 times their age. And so in UNICEF child protection work that we do to combat human trafficking, we also focus on child marriage. And how many of you guys are familiar with human trafficking? A good amount of you, which is really good. Human trafficking is basically the act of recruiting, harboring, selling, transferring, or using of a person by the means of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of exploitation, whether that's sexual or labor. That's the internationally accepted definition of human trafficking. And it happens in every single society, and in the United States, it happens in every single state, particularly here in California. And yes, the coasts like Monterey are not